So one of the reasons we decided to do this exhibition when we did is that this is a big anniversary year for the Statue of Liberty. We're into the year of 125 years past the dedication of the statue, so New York has been celebrating. It's been a natural time of reflection, a perfect time for your book to come out. And I think very few people really know, though, where the idea came from for the statue. And so give us some insight into how it came into being.
So the Statue of Liberty came into being in France in the middle of the 19th century. It was actually 1865, right after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And the group of French people who were behind the idea were emotionally tied to the United States. They loved the American form of government, and they were abolitionists, and so they had particular affection for President Lincoln, and they came together actually at the home of a man named Edward Berenson, who was France's leading specialist on the United States in the middle of the 19th century. Tocqueville died in 1859, and then Laboulaye was the main specialist on the United States, and he was the head of France's Abolition Society. And so a group of men got together at Aboulay's summer house near Versailles, and their idea was to try to come up with a way of commemorating the life and achievements of Abraham Lincoln, to celebrate the victory of the North in the Civil War, and to make a critical comment on their own government, because it turned out that in the 1860s, France had an authoritarian government run by Napoleon III, who was the nephew of Napoleon, and it was a government that was not friendly to liberty. And so this group of men tried to put all these things together: abolition, the commemoration of the life of President Lincoln, and a way of being critical of an authoritarian government and get away with it. And so their idea was to sort of obliquely criticize their own government by talking about how much better the American system of politics was. And so that's the sort of French origin. It really comes out of a French political situation with a group of liberal, in the 19th century sense, well-educated Frenchmen who wanted to make a comment about their own government's politics. And eventually, out of this group came the idea of a colossal statue. But it took a while to get there. And so I don't know if we want to talk about the whole development of the statue. But a lot of the legend says that out of this meeting that took place in June 1865 at Laboulay's house, the conception of this big statue in New York Harbor happened. It didn't take place that way at all. It took about 6 years for the statue to develop, and the first idea that the sculpture of the statue, Frédéric Bartholdi, his first idea was actually to build the Statue of Liberty at the southern end of the Suez Canal. And it would commemorate the opening of Asia onto Europe, the bringing of enlightenment to Asia. That was his idea. And partly he had this idea because he, like many educated Europeans and Americans, Emma Lazarus was one of them, had studied the ancient world, and Bartholdi had actually taken a trip up the Nile and had seen the ancient colossi of Thebes built 3,000 years ago, and he was impressed by those, and he wanted to build a colossal statue of his own, and he thought that he should do what the ancients did. He should build it in Egypt. And that was his first idea. And it was only because the Egyptian government ended up being bankrupt. They were in hock to the British and the French, and the British actually were able to use their position of being creditors to buy up the Suez Canal. That's the reason why they took control of it. And the Egyptian ruler, a man named Ismail, just didn't have the money to finance the Statue of Liberty. We're in the late 1860s now. And Bartholdi went back to France, disappointed that he wasn't going to be able to build his statue in the land of the great ancient colossal statues. And a whole variety of circumstances then intervened. One was the Franco-Prussian War, which kicked Bartholdi out of his home. He was from the province of Alsace, which was occupied by the Germans in 1870. Bartholdi's home city is Colmar, and his actual home was occupied by German soldiers. And he was a great French patriot, and he refused to go there as long as the Germans were occupying it. And so he went back to Paris only to have the Paris Commune break out. The Paris Commune was a revolution in which the working people of the city basically seized control of the government and wanted to institute a very radical form of politics. And Bartholdi was a liberal, again in the 19th century sense, which from our point of view would have made him kind of a centrist, slightly to the left of center, a moderate guy. He believed in liberty and republicanism, but he thought the Paris Commune went way too far. And so here was a guy, he was sort of an exile in his own country. He couldn't live in his home city because it was occupied by the German enemy, and he couldn't find his way to return to Paris, which was in the hands of political radicals whom he hated. And so his idea then was to actually go himself in person to the land of liberty, which for him was the United States. He had never been there before, he didn't speak a word of English, he didn't know anybody, and in the fall, September of 1871, he wrote a letter to his friend Laboulaye, the professor, the specialist in American politics and history, and he said, Bartholdi said that, well, I'm leaving France, and I hope to find in America the liberty that we do not have here in our own country, and which I hope someday we will. And so that's how he got to the United States, and it was only when he got here that he came up with the idea, you know, that statue that I was going to build in Egypt, it really needs to be in New York